Hey guys, welcome to 23 Degrees Sideways. So this is going to be one of those economic global analysis videos. So if that's not your thing and you just want the Enlightenment stuff, skip this video. So the US is nice. And that is actually the really key element to a lot of what you have grown up with. I don't think there's a whole lot of people who are old enough to have real good memories of pre-US global influence. So pretty much you grew up with a world where the US is nice. And that's actually really important, okay? For all of the crap that we get and we give ourselves, and you know, there's nothing like an American to criticize America, right? Americans will always tell you how awful we are, how interventionist we are, how we just destroy countries and puppet governments and everything. Well, not really, okay? We are ridiculously nice. We also make a lot of money doing it. Some parts of our population do, and there's a lot of stuff that goes with it. We could always do better. But you know, the world standard of living, the world standard of infant mortality, the global poverty rate, like the world. This is another thing. You haven't grown up without it. To experience, very few Americans have experienced grinding third world conditions where they remain, which is pretty rare now. Very few Americans have studied the history to really understand what it's like when your kids starve in your arms. That used to be normal. Not with America on the watch, okay? We are ridiculously nice. We mostly allow other countries to have essentially complete and total freedom. We operate as a kind of a hegemon instead of an empire, and that's really important. And we do it, honestly, very fairly in global historical terms. You know, a globe where China or Russia or even France have the power and the capacity of the United States looks very different and a lot worse. And it's just blunt. It's just going to be there. So let's talk about a little bit about that, because in America there's a lot of doomers, okay? And the doomers are, you know, the American currency is going to collapse. All the money is going to collapse because we spent too much on stimulus packages. Well, the thing is that despite the current economic policy trying to destroy the economy, the stimulus packages actually did stimulate the economy, and stimulation is actually really good for the economy, and it's very stimulative. Got it? That means the money actually does stuff. It's not just printing money. The money goes into effect and does stuff. As opposed to the fake stimulation, the artificial stimulation, the auto-stimulation that we have gotten with the current presidential administration, where what they did was they switched it so that, for example, instead of getting an actual economic stimulation, you were getting prepayments of your tax returns, okay? Families were getting prepayments on their tax refunds from child tax credits, and that was supposed to be a stimulus, but it's not. It's not a stimulus, it's the same, it doesn't add anything. You see, it doesn't really help. Maybe it reduces a little bit of the pre-refund loans? Maybe? I don't know. Okay, so I'm going to get on topic. I'm looking off of the screen periodically because I'm having a conversation with Chris, and we're talking about, you know, the imminent collapse of the US dollar. And, you know, everyone loves this in America. I'm almost 52 years old. By the time you watch this, I'm probably 52 or 53 or 59 or whatever, because I don't have an audience. But I literally grew up with this. My father and my uncle used to have arguments at the breakfast table, depending on where everyone was deployed, about the imminent collapse of the US dollar because Nixon and the gold standard and all that stuff, right? Bretton Woods. You know, I literally grew up with this. It was entertaining breakfast table conversation, not quite as entertaining as cutting growths off of people or doing emergency appendectomies, because that was also breakfast table conversation. But yeah, I grew up with this imminent collapse of the US dollar. And it never happened, and it never happened, and it never happened, and it never happened. The 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the early 2000s. Oh, every presidency, every economic policy, every time someone says gold, gold, gold. Because of course they think that you can run global capital finance, financial capitalism, but global capital finance off of physical gold. You can't. You can't, okay? So why is it the US dollar that runs global finance? Why? Well, because of agriculture and logistics and oil and safety and transport and large transport and shipping companies. And oh yeah, did I mention agriculture? Yeah, it's a big one. And technology and foreign aid. Basically because there's a trust that the US is going to be there no matter what. And if the world completely implodes, if everything goes dark this winter because everything's so bad, the US is fine. The US is fine. We might lose 15-20% of our overall standard of living. Like we might regress to the 70s, the 80s in terms of stuff. We might not get brand new internet connected toasters for Christmas. Okay? I mean that's really what we're talking about is having to make do with like regular stuff like wool socks for Christmas. We produce all of our own energy if we need to. We are capable of exporting food with zero imports. Okay, very few countries can do that. You know, China exports food, but they import fertilizer. Woo. Brazil imports fertilizer. Australia is utterly dependent on importing fertilizer, except for some of their animals. Actually, livestock saves the world if things go really bad, because four-legged animal storage and growth doesn't usually rely on fertilizer, despite what all of the vegan activists want to tell you. You know, cattle will actually move themselves. They don't need oil to do it. Surprise, they have legs. I can't believe these people sometimes. Anyway, so if the world goes, the US actually does pretty good. We probably expand our borders a little more officially in terms of Mexico and make them an actual dependent state. Maybe not, because then we have to do labor laws and EPA regulations and stuff, and that would be very damaging to Mexican industry. So, you know, we'll use them one way or another. We might turn them into colonies or something. They're a protectorate already. I'm actually boggled that we allow the cartels to exist, because we can end that. So, anyway, but I want you to imagine the rest of the world without the US, okay? You can pick any country to go dark, and bad things happen. But if the US goes dark, shipping, agriculture, agricultural technology, agricultural equipment, agricultural financial aid, agricultural products, sales of agricultural products. A lot of countries do very well selling small but expensive things to the US for us to consume. We import. See, all of those numbers that you read when you go look this stuff up, because I pissed you off with this video, are going to talk about dollars. How many billions of dollars of food does the US import? Well, we don't import wheat. We import $20 a pound cheese from fancy caves in third world countries, where the economy would collapse if we weren't paying that much money for their cheese, which you can't make in the US because it's not clean. I'm not even kidding. You know, this is like French wine, Italian wine. I mean, we don't generally import the really cheap stuff. Yes, with Western coastal global shipping, you know, lots of South America on the Pacific coast produces random produce for us to have out of season fresh grapes and stuff. And that matters, but that matters a lot to more to those countries economically than it does to us. So we go dark, they actually can't grow those crops. like physically can't grow those crops. If we go dark, the U.S. goes dark, a lot of the world goes very hungry very fast. For all of the dependence that Africa has on China right now, they're still utterly reliant on the U.S. for the agricultural base for a relatively large percentage of the inhabited parts of that continent, the densely inhabited parts of that continent. It doesn't look good. Okay, so the U.S. dollar, and this is where this is going. The U.S. dollar is under attack. Saudi Arabia is threatening to stop using the U.S. dollar and go to the mythical BRICS currency. Okay, BRICS is an acronym for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South America, the 5 main emerging industrializing economies. It's supposed to split off the U.S. and make things better for other parts of the world, and bring the U.S. down a notch and all that. And they're going to develop their own currency like the EU, and they're going to start doing their own stuff. And of course, totally going to work because Russia and China are totally going to agree to peg their currencies to each other, and India, and the rand. Oh, of course, South Africa is so stable economically. China's a house of cards. China, oh man. We'll get to China. I may have to do a separate video for China because I don't want to make this into a half-hour video. So I will do a separate video on China shortly. But this whole idea of the BRICS currency is almost insanely ludicrous. Let's start with Brazil. Brazil currently has people putting out bounties on criminals and vigilantes, because vigilantes are being legally encouraged to kill armed criminals who operate in gang. There's a certain gang kind of thing where they do motorcycle-based theft, and people are being encouraged to go just run them over, shoot them, whatever. And then there's bounties going both ways. Like different groups are putting bounties out on vigilantes who are getting internet famous for doing this. They have slavery, and they have to import fertilizer to grow actual crops. Now, that's not as big a deal as you think it is, because the fact is that animal-based food production actually works pretty well in Brazil, better in Argentina and Uruguay, but it works okay in Brazil, so they're not going to actually starve. But most of the world thinks they will, because most of the world thinks that you have to eat plants to stay alive, because animals eating plants that you don't have to fertilize and then turning into food doesn't make sense in their brains. So Brazil's not going to starve or anything, but as an emerging industrial economy, they need to fix some things. Okay, the only thing that looks worse in terms of current social fabric issues is South Africa, because South Africa is getting ready to have a 3-way genocide. And if you don't know why it's a 3-way genocide, just let's not even try. Everyone has a political or racist bone to pick in this, and so everyone will say I'm wrong, but South Africa's looking at a 3-way genocide, and things are not healthy down there. Russia has been an emerging industrial economy since the 1500s, and they will remain an emerging industrial economy for the next 100, 200 years, depending on some various factors about what we do, what Turkey does to them, and so on. Russia's always emerging and never emerged, never matured. I'm sorry, but this currency, India is okay, and India could do well, but the problem is that India has to build an internal empire in order to do that. Remember that India is not a traditional single nation, and a lot of the problems with India and Pakistan actually stem from the fact that some of that border and stuff is actually kind of artificial. India is traditionally any number of kingdoms, some of which are actual empires, like imperial level kingdoms, and putting them into one theoretically socially democratic state hasn't actually functioned all that well. I have friends who travel in India, and there are actual civil wars and rebellions constantly going on in India. One of my friends a couple of years ago was on a train. He's like, yeah, I was on a train, and then all these guys got on, and they all had rifles, and they were wearing these armbands on their uniforms, and they were going to fight some local thing, and I just kind of sat back and stayed chill and be like, I don't have a dog in this fight, and just here on the train. And they left me alone, and I'm like, yeah, that's India. That happens. So BRICS is going to destroy the US dollar. Everyone's always saying that the US dollar is going to collapse. The US dollar is not strictly about money supply or the evil Federal Reserve Bank, which is a bunch of, they're bad, and we need to do something about that for our own sakes. But what a lot of people don't realize is that the US dollar is the currency of the world for purely pragmatic reasons also, not just financial reasons. There are American money, American businesses, American technology, American expertise, American people are all over the world making things work. Now, I'm not saying we're the only ones who can. When I was in Saudi Arabia, we had the British oil engineers. Not as many of them as Americans, but they were there. There was the British ones, and there were the Swedish ones. The Swedish technical crews for the oil fields were actually fantastic, great people. No problem with that, but that's not growing all that much food. That is oil production, but it's not growing all that much food. That's part of just the Saudi Arabia thing. The U.S. gets ditched by Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia's oil production drops by a third instantly. Poof. Like, Saudi Arabia cannot do this successfully without the U.S. And then the Russian oil industry collapses because Saudi Arabia is going to be much cheaper than Russian oil, and Saudi Arabia has to sell the oil to someone because we're not buying it. We shouldn't be buying it because we can produce our own, but we currently have an inmate in the presidential office, the House, the White House, who's got this idea that America has to be dependent on other countries for energy for some sort of fairness reasons or something. Like, this is stupid. Insane and stupid. So, that's all. That's it. This idea that BRICS is going to become a super EU and take over currency duties from the US. I'll get into China a little bit more here in the next video. Stay sideways.